So here is some background info. I work for a utility company in Massachusetts, which requires me to go into people's homes quite frequently. I'm 22, and my partner in the field was another male aged 23. We got scheduled for a shut-off on a house due to lack of payment. The house was actually in a very wealthy town, so we figured it was a mistake and went to speak with the owner of the property. We drove for about 20 minutes until we reached this house. We both thought it was a mistake, as it was the size of a large shed. However, we went to the front door, which was blocked by a large pile of branches from some dead trees on the property. I knocked and waited for about 5 minutes, and as we were about to leave, an older man answered the door. We explained the situation about lack of payment, and he guided us to the basement door and said that we could find what we were looking for down there. I went down to do the shut-off, and my partner stayed upstairs in the kitchen, otherwise known as the small room with a mini fridge, toaster oven, and hole in the floor. I was in the basement, which was pitch black and very small, and I was convinced that I could hear people faintly whispering. I looked around with my flashlight and saw nothing. After I heard these noises, I did my shut-off and hurried back upstairs. My partner was still in the kitchen room, and I asked him where the man had gone. He said he had to use the bathroom. We waited about 15 minutes in the kitchen before I knocked on the bathroom door. No answer. I yelled in and said, "Sir, we're finished. We're going to leave now and we need you to sign this form." No answer. We waited a bit longer before I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked, and I cracked the door and said, "Sorry, but I didn't think you could hear me from the hallway. We have finished our job and we need you to sign the form before we leave." Again, no answer. I opened the door to a room with a sink and a toilet, small light bulb, and no windows. I asked my partner if he was sure he went in there. My partner said yes, that he saw him go in and closed the door behind him and that he hadn't come out. Obviously, we left immediately and closed the front door behind us. I only have a picture of the front of the building. I'm in the habit of leaving my phone in the glove box when I'm at work and on my shift. But still, I just don't have a reasonable explanation for what happened that day.
My grandfather was a bad man. He was an alcoholic, extremely violent. He actually tried to kill my grandmother in front of their kids. Now, one of his less horrible acts was abandoning my grandmother with their 6 kids, all under the age of 12. Some of his kids had maintained minimal contact with him. He lived about 30 or 40 miles from my grandmother and the 2 kids who'd stayed in this area. When he was in his 80s, he was hospitalized and passed away in the middle of the night. In the morning, his oldest child, one of my aunts, went to the morgue to identify his body and fill out the paperwork. On her way there, she stopped by my grandmother's to break the news. Just as she was about to tell my grandmother what had happened, my grandmother said, "Oh, it's a sad day. He died just past midnight, I imagine." Now, my grandmother had begun to show some signs of dementia, or basic old age, and so the weird comments weren't too out of character, and my aunt assumed that the hospital had let one of the siblings already inform her of the news. My aunt just shook it off and drove to the morgue. When she went to go and read through the death certificate, she was shocked to see the time of death listed as 12:10 AM. On her way home, she stopped back at my grandmother's house and asked her who had called her to tell her the news, and asked why she knew what she did about his death, and especially the fact that it was just past midnight. My grandmother then said, "He came to see me at 12:30 and we talked for a spell. He wanted to apologise for all that he had done to me and you kids. I think he made his peace and was able to move on, so I'm glad for that." My grandmother then went to resume her humming and doing a jigsaw puzzle. There I was, bored in combat zone Iraq, drawing a picture. It was full of scenery, a few hills, some dead grass, a tree stump. On the stump I decided to draw a creature, humanoid, like a pygmy werewolf. 4 foot something, claws and teeth. The commander then shows up, calls us in for a mission, and I put this drawing away. Weeks later, we're in an abandoned base, staying in some new buildings with no windows, doors or anything, just concrete bones, and opening up for the installations of these things. Every night, we have to set up watch. It takes a whole platoon to cover the building. This is minus a few who have to run for reinforcements. I was one such reinforcement, sitting in an empty room in the dark. After a while, I notice that I'm not alone. I look up and I see that the thing I drew is staring at me on the ceiling. So I'm there holding onto my M249 tight, waiting for something to happen. When my team leader comes in, asking if everything was alright, I tell him yes. He then walks over to one of the holes where the window would have been and looks out and says, "Did you see that?" Later, near the Iranian border, we stayed at another abandoned base. It was a bunch of classrooms spread between 6 buildings. All of these buildings are just on one floor. These have walls that don't even reach the ceilings. I had just gotten off a guard shift and come back into my room, and my buddy's there, just staring at the ceiling. I looked up. There it was again. "What's that?" my buddy asked me. Just then, a squad leader joins us asking what we're doing. We explained it, but it was gone again. And we never saw it in that country again. Now fast forward several years, I gotten injured in Iraq from faulty equipment getting a medical discharge. I just then started getting back on with my life, and I'm in a bookstore one day, and I find this book on demons. I decided to have a flip through it. What I saw sent shivers up my spine. There it is, the exact same thing that I drew, the exact same thing that I saw twice at 2 different locations, preceding a personal injury that plagued me to this day. When I was a kid, my brother and I would get stuck with babysitting the neighbour's kid. His name was Alex. Alex was really fond of my Lego set that I had in the corner of my room facing the window. He would play it for hours, staying preoccupied, while my brother and I would play video games in the living room. So one night, I fell asleep on the couch while babysitting. My brother then came to me and said, "Alex is under your bed, shaking." I asked what's wrong with him. My brother told me to follow him into the room and try and talk him out from under the bed. I go inside to find him on the verge of tears as he was trembling profusely under my bed. I asked Alex, "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" And he whimpered, "It," while looking at my side closet. As I walked towards the bed to try and help him out, he ran. He ran all the way back over to his house and waited on his front steps until his parents got home. Now, my parents were out to dinner with his, and he explained the whole story in detail to both of his parents and mine. The explanation that was given sends pure shivers down my spine. My mum told me that while Alex was playing with Lego, he heard a slight mumbling from the closet, something that resembled a faint vocalization of "come here." He said that he looked behind him and noticed that the closet had a slight opening with light peering in from my lamp. He wasn't really sure what was going on, and he then stared at the crack until suddenly he saw an eyelid open. He told us that there was a man in my closet. Alex then hid under my bed after he gave out a slight yelp. This was actually what caught my brother's attention in the first place. My family then rushes into my house and into my room. In horror, we find that my closet door rocked open. My window had just been left open, which had previously been closed. There was also things everywhere on the floor that had previously not been touched. After investigation, my parents found that there was no way it could have actually been a man. We still have no idea to this day what force we were reckoning with. I don't think I want to know though. A year or two ago, I walked into my brother's room and looked at his mirror which showed my room down the hall. I then saw a pitch black figure in the hallway right next to my door across the hall. I stared for the longest 5 seconds of my life. When I turned around, it was gone. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. I then went to close the door to my room. Just as I was about to approach my door though, it slammed shut. I quickly opened it out of reaction, expecting to fight an intruder, but nobody was there. There was also another incident that happened in the middle of the night at like 2 AM. I saw that exact same black figure, exactly as I described it before, at the foot of my bed. I looked away to wake up my friend who was spending the night, but as I looked back, it was gone. Sometimes I wonder if I might have attracted this because I used to play with a Ouija board alone before things started happening. I say this because both of the encounters happened at different houses. I'm just hoping that maybe I'm slightly schizophrenic. I was home last year during a break from university with a friend and decided to go see a friend in a different city in his university. It was a small city with rivers, hills and forests. At night, we decided to go to a nearby forest to smoke and drink by a river, but still being on the main road. So we were standing with our car parked and I was drinking and both of them were making joints and smoking. It was about 11 in the night and it was dead dark with no lights or people around for several kilometers. We had been standing there for about half an hour when a guy who was 25 or 6 come out of the tree line and come to talk to me. He talks to me and says that this place is not safe at night and that we shouldn't be here. My friend who used to study there heard me talking to somebody and started walking towards me, but stopped right there. His face went white and he then told me to get in the car and that we were going. I told the guy thanks and said goodbye and we turned the car around. For 10 minutes, my friend didn't talk to me about what happened, and it was finally when we were out of the forest that he broke his silence. He told me that this guy who I was talking to was a boy from his university who died on that exact same road 2 years back.
The only pictures I have seen of my grandparents are 2 black and white photos of them in my den. My mother always spoke very highly of her parents, and I'll see her tear up now and then when she speaks of them. When I was in 2nd grade, I had a dream about them. They were introducing themselves to me and giving me a tour of their house and boat, which is something my mother never showed or mentioned to me. My mother never showed me their house because it was sold, and she also never mentioned about a boat. They made me a huge dinner and invited all of my aunts and uncles, but in the dream they were children instead of adults, and my grandma even showed me her famous sauce she made every Sunday, which is something that my mother never told me about. It was all very happy and upbeat. And at the end of the dream, my grandma pulled out my speech notebook. I had to use a speech notebook because I had a speech tutor to get rid of my lisp at the time. She began to write in it, and then she closed the book and turned it to me and said, "I have to go now. I love you." And I just woke up like that, and it was daytime. I ran to my parents' room and told them my dream. I explained how the house had looked, and my mum began to tear up. She said her childhood house was just like that. As I was explaining it, she showed me some pictures that matched the house in my dream. She also explained her father's love for his boat, and how every Sunday, her mother would invite all the cousins over for dinner, and she would make her special sauce. She was now crying pretty bad, as all the details of my dream were very accurate. I then remembered the notebook and ran downstairs to get it, and there it was, on the very last page written out, "I love you always, Grandma," with a little picture of a boat drawn underneath it. I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran to show my mother, and her jaw dropped. She began sobbing now, saying that it was without a doubt her mother's handwriting. I'll never forget this experience, and I truly believe that it was my grandparents' way of meeting and connecting with me.
When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-sized bed with my older sister and our family dog. She would sleep at the foot of our bed every night. So when I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black without eyes or a face. I tried to wake up my sister, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up and raised her head and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. This sound then woke up my sister, and she then saw the figure too and started screaming. My parents then come rushing into the room, and as soon as they turned the lights on, nothing was there. To this day, both me and my sister are adamant that we saw a ghost or a demon in our room. We know we weren't the only ones who saw it because our dog was going crazy too. When I was 16 years old, I encountered something that still bugs me to this day. I woke up at around 6 AM on a normal weekday and went downstairs to get ready for school. Nobody else in my family had woken up at this point. I'd gone to get into the shower, still sleepy, barely able to hold my eyes open. After a few minutes of showering, somebody tried to get in and I told whoever it was that I was in the shower. The person then proceeded to aggressively try and open the door. I saw the door handle going down and up like crazy, so she, whatever it was, then knocked on the door handle even harder. Then, it suddenly stopped. I didn't think much about it, but when I got back out of the shower, I realised that nobody was up yet. I then went back down and proceeded to have my breakfast. After a while, my dad come downstairs. I asked him if it was him who wanted to use a bathroom earlier. He said no, and that both my mum and younger brothers were still asleep, so it couldn't have been them either. And even if it had been my family members, why would they have not tried to open the door a normal way? Why would they have done it so aggressively at 6 in the morning? I'm just lucky that I locked that door. A few years ago one night at around 3 AM, my wife and I were sleeping and I feel myself slowly waking up from a really deep sleep. My eyes started lifting up and as soon as they were focused on the lamp on my dresser, it slid off and shattered onto the floor. My wife and I quickly sat up and looked at each other, both horrified at the startling noise. We then agreed we would clean it up in the morning and went back to sleep. The next morning when we woke up, the lamp was at the foot of my bed. It was about 5 feet from where it fell. It was completely intact though, not broken whatsoever. We're still trying to make sense of it. In the middle of the night while sleeping, I hear a sound like somebody is taking a paper clip from my desk and throwing it against the wall, and it then bounces across the desk. I wake up to this noise, turn on the light, and right by my bed as I sit up, I look over and see nothing. Weird. As I'm about to lay back down, my £20 steel gumball machine falls over by itself on my bed and directly onto the pillow where my head was only 30 seconds earlier. I flipped out, scrambled out of my bed as I'm totally taken by surprise. As I'm standing up, I then feel something under my feet. A paperclip. I thought the murderous gumball machine on the floor and the paperclip back on my desk and crawl into the safety of my comforter. Nothing like this has ever happened again. When I was around 7 years old, it was close to the holidays. The house I grew up in has a downstairs and a downstairs basement, so I left my pillow downstairs, and after a long movie binge I went down to grab it. I grab the pillow and look up, and I then see that there's a man on the other side of the room, dressed in all grey, just looking around, paying no attention to me. Weird thing was, he was entirely in grey, head to toe, skin colour and everything grey. I'm just staring, jaw wide open, completely petrified with fright. He looked up at me, notices me, able to see that I can see him. He then dropped his jaw, lower than seems humanly possible, almost as if he was screaming at me, but with no sound, pure silence. He then ran through the wall and disappeared.
For the first 12.5 years of my life, I lived in a haunted house. I thought I'd share my experiences. Over the years, I noticed a number of creepy things happening in my home. I'd leave my room for a few minutes only to return with my things in a completely different spot than normal. There would be loud crashing noises with no cause, and I'd constantly hear this scratching noise from the ceiling of my bedroom at night, which would stop as soon as one of my parents entered, then resume when they left. These persisted through the years that I lived in that house. My first sighting was when I was 5 years old. Though this was more than just likely a dream, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw my father's head directly facing me and smiling creepily, floating down the hallway, in a low frame rate type of way. In spite of my father still being alive and well, it creeped me right out, and I couldn't get back to sleep for the rest of the night. A few years later, my sister and I were playing in the playroom when we caught a glimpse of someone watching us from the other room. When we looked, they hid behind a wall. Neither me nor my sister got a good look, but we thought it was just one of our parents fooling around. We went to check it out, but we found nothing. My final experience at that house is the one that made me believe in ghosts. I was around 11 years old at the time, building something out of Lego in the playroom. The room was across the stairs, which had one flight going up the stairs to the kitchen, and another going down to the storage basement. I was sitting with my back to the stairs, with the door open to the playroom. I got a sudden chill and turned around. What I saw was a boy with pure white hair and skin, with a grey outfit floating down the stairs from the kitchen, then floating into the basement, fading away as it went down the stairs. I didn't tell anyone about this, as I figured that they think I were crazy. My family moved to our current home a couple of years later, and one day, we somehow got onto the topic of ghosts, and I decided to share that I had seen a ghost in our old house. It is at this point my sister pipes up and asks if it was a little boy, then goes on to describe the exact same spirit that I saw. For me, this confirmed that our old house was haunted. I had never told anyone about the ghost I saw.
As a child, whenever I got fevers, I would always, in my fatigued and pain-infused state, hear a man counting in a very deep voice. He would count from 1 up. As the numbers would get larger, the voice would get louder and more intense. It became less frequent as I grew older, and I don't experience this anymore. I brush it aside as a reoccurring nightmare, That was until recently. I've learnt that my sister would experience the exact same thing when she was younger as well. I know this isn't the scariest story, but it does send shivers down my spine trying to comprehend all of this. From 3 until 13, I lived in a nice home out near Yosemite National Park. There was nothing spectacular about it. There were 4 bedrooms, a den, a dining room, just a normal. Just down a little dirt road, and if you've ever been around those parts, you'll know it's absolutely miles away from civilization. My whole childhood I was visited by this girl in white. She never spoke. I would just wake up at night and see her feet there. I asked my dad and his response every time was, "Men in our family can see ghosts." My rationale with this? I'm a skeptic, I remain that to this day, but the story that I'm telling now made me question all of this. Was that it didn't bother me. We did have some mild schizophrenia that was running in our family. I was sure that this was it. Now, she didn't look like other people. There was something off about her. Now, after my father died, my mum decided to sell the house. Now, we never once had contact with the buyers. We only knew them by their name. The buyers had a son who went to the same school as our neighbours, and the son apparently came to school without sleep repeatedly, complaining that there was a girl that watched him at night and that he needed to get out. Not knowing who or what that was still sends shivers up my spine to this day. I still have no idea what she wanted. I'm just glad that she doesn't visit me anymore. I was a rookie cop when my brother committed suicide. He was one of my oldest siblings, but we were very close. He died in another state, and I have a lot of guilt about what happened. I should have really recognized the signs. His remains were in a bad shape by the time he was discovered, so it was a closed coffin service. So about a week after I'm on patrol one night, my partner and I see a pimp pistol whipping one of his girls. I jump out and the pimp then sees me, and then there's a chase on foot. I was running after him, gun in hand. He then cuts through a narrow corridor under a building that leads to a courtyard in the middle. Right before I reach the courtyard, I hear, "It's okay," in my dead brother's voice. I hit the courtyard and the guy is against the side pointing a gun to my head. He squeezes the trigger twice. I froze for a millisecond and then started beating him in the head with my revolver. To this day, I don't know why I didn't just shoot him, cuff him, and walk him back to the street and find my partner. I tell my partner about him squeezing the trigger, but not the voices I heard. We later unloaded the gun and we saw that there were 2 bullets that both have strike marks on them. We then taken these to the lab for testing. There was nothing wrong with them. After trying to fire them again, we got them both to go off perfectly. My stepmom and dad used to work opposite shifts for a while. He was on nights and she was on days. They had a set of baby monitors for when my sister and I were babies. My dad said that they could record short messages with them. They would leave each other messages out on the table for when they got home from their shift. This went on for a while. Once these shifts lined up, they didn't have to do this anymore, so just put the monitors away in storage. So unfortunately, she died of cancer at a really young age, and my dad had just gotten back from the funeral and was home alone. He spent that night going through their things, packing some of her stuff away. He said he had one of the baby monitors sitting out on the coffee table, and it suddenly woke him up in the middle of the night with an old message going off on repeat that she had recorded. It said, "I love you, Mike. I love you, Mike," over and over again. My dad told me that he just sat there on the couch in the dark and listened to her message until the batteries died. A couple of weeks later, he picked us kids up for the weekend. After my sister and I went inside, he was sitting on the porch smoking. A strong gust of wind suddenly blew, and he said he could smell the exact perfume that she would always wear. So I got home from my job as a server at midnight. One of my roommates was in the Navy and was deployed at the time, and the other one was at his girlfriend's house. I cooked myself dinner, and as I'm cooking, my dog starts growling and barking towards the middle of the room at nothing. This is especially weird because she never, ever barks. Now, she was rescued as a puppy. I brought her to give me a sense of security, and I've also trained her to never bark at anyone. So I just dismiss her barking as odd, and I finish cooking and eat. I then turn to go and put the pots into the sink. I have to turn the tap on early because it takes forever to get hot. But once I've turned around, I find that it's already on. Again, I think it's odd, but I don't really think it's worth freaking out over. I can now see that some of the hairs on my dog are standing up. Nobody's home and it's midnight, so I figured maybe that's just what's making her feel weird. I decided that I was going to tough it out at this point. So after cleaning, I go into the bathroom and sit on the sink to pluck my eyebrows. Now my bathroom was extremely small, with the sink immediately to your right as you enter, with the toilet next to this. The bathtub is at the end. The toilet paper dispenser is directly across from the toilet. It was a really narrow room, so you could reach a TP while sitting on the toilet. So the way I was sitting, the toilet paper dispenser was behind me. After 2 or 3 minutes, I hear a weird noise behind me. I turn around and I can see that the whole roll of toilet paper was unravelling as fast as it could be. It was like somebody was pulling it. I then got the hell out of the bathroom. At the same time, I felt the room become suddenly very cold. The thing was, there was no windows or doors except for the one leading into it, so it couldn't have just been a breeze causing this. I then put my dog onto a leash and ran out of the apartment faster than Usain Bolt. By the time this happened, it was already 2 AM. None of my friends were awake, so I spent the night sitting outside the door of the apartment. When I went back the next morning, the whole roll of toilet paper was on the ground. When I was younger, I grew up in a house that was supposedly haunted. Now in this house, I was very lonely being an only child. In fact, I didn't even have my dad. I never knew the guy, and most of the time my mum was working like crazy to try and support me. This would mean that I had most of the day to myself. Now, my mum's pretty sure that when I was younger, I made an imaginary friend to try and make up for this. I do know about this friend I had called John. John and I were very close. He would normally come and see me in my bedroom of a night time. He was around the same age as me. We could talk about everything normally, but whenever I asked him personal questions, he would just go quiet. My mum would sometimes come in and ask to see John, but every time she come in, he would vanish. So there I was, looking like I was talking to myself, and obviously my mum never believed me. My mum did ask me what he looked like, and I told her he looked exactly like that painting in the corner there, and in the painting there was a young child standing in a field smiling. My mum would just kind of go, huh, okay, then she would just wander off. So fast forward a few years, we eventually had to leave that house because my mum couldn't afford to stay there any longer. This made me really sad because I wasn't going to be able to see John anymore. John also knew this, but we both said our goodbyes to each other, and well, that was all I thought of it. That was until years later that me and my mother returned to that exact same house. So the new owners were moving out, and my mum got word of this and decided to take a quick look round with me. As we got into the house, everything was just like we had left it. It was clearly an old couple that had lived here after us, and they clearly didn't change anything. As we were going through the house, it was exactly like we had left it. It was funny because I just remembered it all like it was yesterday. I then followed my mum through into the living room, and I suddenly got this weird overpowering urge to go back to my bedroom. I told my mum that I was gonna go and see if anything I'd left in my room was still there, and she said okay, and I excused myself and went up the stairs. Now every step that I'd taken, I got this more and more powering urge to go up to my bedroom. This got to a point where I almost felt like crying. I had no idea why. Just as I stood on that step, I looked up the stairs and I could see him, John, smiling and waving back at me. It was really weird. It was just as I remembered. It wasn't like he was waving to say hello, it was more like he was waving to say goodbye. And I turned around quickly to go and call out for my mum, and I decided to glance back one more time before shouting to her, and he was gone, as if he was never there. I rubbed my eyes and I couldn't make sense of any of this. Surely it's just my mind playing tricks on me, right? So I decided to venture upstairs on my own. I started calling out for John. Now I didn't know it at the time, but this must have worried my mum because she come jogging up behind me. I then got into my room and I couldn't believe what I saw. There was that exact same painting on the floor from all those years ago that John was stood in smiling. Except this time, for the first time ever, it wasn't John in that photo. It was just an empty field. I knew for certain that my friend was in that photo before. As my mum followed up behind me, she saw the same thing as me, and I looked back at her and she just had her mouth open. It was clear she had seen the exact same thing as me. She also knew that John was in that photo before. It wouldn't have been possible for anybody to have changed it. It was almost like he'd never been there in the first place. Now, I understand that that was John saying goodbye to me. Although our last encounter was very brief, I'm just happy to know that wherever John is, he's now moved on and is at peace. I hope we do meet again one day. About 2 Decembers ago, my fiance was over at my parents' house with me. My parents had gone to a Christmas party and he was helping me set up the tree and decorate the house. All of the stuff is in the attic and everybody said that the attic had a strange feeling about it. So we're setting up the attic and he mentions that he feels like somebody's watching us. I said that it's probably just a cat and that he doesn't have anything to worry about as I hand him some boxes. We then go downstairs and we are unpacking the boxes when we then heard a series of thuds ahead. I say, oh, the cat must have knocked something down. But my fiance then points out that the cat is asleep on the couch. It scares me and we go outside. At that moment my parents then pull up. My dad then moans at me for being outside without a coat on. My fiance and I tell my parents that we heard something and we're officially creeped out. My mum and fiance decide to go to the room where the attic entrance is. Lo and behold, a box that had been sitting far away from the stairs had fallen down the stairs on its own. And that's not it. There was a time after that my fiance and I were sleeping at my parents' house. We were getting comfy and slowly dozing off. All of a sudden, right in my ear, I hear a demented, creepy voice saying, "Sweet dreams," and a crackle. I sit up and grab my fiance. I asked him if he heard it. He said, "Heard what?" I tell him I heard a creepy voice in my ear that told me sweet dreams. He was like, "Oh, I thought you meant that creepy laugh you just did." But there was nobody in the room with us, and I didn't laugh. When I was younger, I lived in a house that was built in the 1880s. Now in my bedroom, I had a big old mirror. Now there was just something about that mirror that I hated so much. I couldn't even bear to look at it. At night, I would sometimes even hallucinate at night time and think that I could see a face in the mirror. It was pretty scary stuff. Anyway, one day all of a sudden, my parents immediately made us leave that house and they never spoke about it again. I have no idea why they did this. Well, that was until today. So apparently, The night after, I had another nightmare about a face watching me, and I ran into my parents' room. My mum decided to see just what was wrong with that room, and if there was actually maybe a person in there hiding or something, anything that could be causing that to happen to me, so she decided to sleep there for herself. What happened next is truly terrifying, and my mum shakes when she recounts this to me. All of a sudden, in the dead of night, the mirror comes flying off the wall. The light flickers on. My mum thinks that this is just her mind playing tricks on her and goes to get up to switch the light on fully. What she can see then is truly harrowing. There, where the mirror was once stood, spelt out in bright blood red, is my name, Jane. And there's also a demonic star behind that. There's no way that anybody could have put that there while we're in the house. Not only that, it was fresh. I mean, literally like it was done the same day. When I was around 12, my mother had to go out of town for a bit and she left me home alone for a few days. Now that might sound bad to some of you, but we lived really close to our relatives, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. She refuses to give me a mobile phone at the time because she figured that if anything went wrong, she'd just be able to call me on the landline. So she told me the date when she had come home, and that was that. The date arrives and I hear my mum knocking on the door downstairs, calling my name. Now my dog, who absolutely loved her, got excited when she heard her voice and ran to go downstairs to greet her. She then got to the door, freaked out and ran back upstairs to me. I refused to go down and open the door. The phone then starts ringing and the knocking stopped. I pick up the phone to hear my mum say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to stay here one more day. I'm gonna head home tomorrow." Hello everyone, thank you for watching. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. The guest narrator on this video is Mortis Media. I really like him and he has a very good channel that I strongly recommend everybody goes and checks out and subscribes to him. He really is good at what he does, so make sure you go and do that. So thank you my friend, I really appreciated having you on my channel. I'm also featured on his channel on a parallel video also about paranormal ghost stories. So make sure you go and check that out. I'll leave a link in the description to that and his channel. So thank you again. Thank you everybody for watching. Again, sorry I've not been able to upload quite as consistently as I've wanted to. I've been forced to keep on working where I've been unwell, and it's kind of just pushed me to the edge to be honest, but I'm a tough cookie and I can keep going, and I've just gotten over my illness, so plenty more videos where that come from. And yeah, if there's any channels you'd like to see me work with, then please leave it in the comments below. Thank you all, have a great day, I'll talk to you all soon.